The alarm on David Marsh's phone was set for 5:30 a.m., but he had been staring at the ceiling for over an hour. The numbers glowed red in the darkness, counting down the seconds until another day of pretending began. Beside him, his wife Claire slept fitfully, her hand resting on the empty side of the bed where their daughter Lily used to climb in during thunderstorms. Lily was now in the children's hospital across town, connected to machines that beeped in a rhythm that had become the new soundtrack of their lives. David slipped out of bed quietly, his bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, a man of 42 with tired eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow that appeared earlier each day. He was an accountant, a man who dealt in certainties, in numbers that added up neatly. But now, the numbers were a nightmare. The experimental treatment that could save Lily from the rare autoimmune disorder cost $70,000 up front. His insurance had denied the claim. They called it experimental and therefore not medically necessary. David had screamed at a customer service representative until his voice gave out. He had sold his car, drained their savings, borrowed from everyone he knew. He was still $40,000 short. As he splashed cold water on his face, his phone vibrated. It was a text from a number he did not recognize. It contained only an address and a time, 8 p.m., the old warehouse district. There was no name, but David knew exactly who it was. A ghost from a life he had abandoned 20 years ago, a man named Vince who had grown up on the same block and had taken a very different path. David deleted the message. But by the time he walked into the hospital room and saw Lily, pale and small against the white pillows, he knew that by 8 p.m., he would be at that warehouse. There was no line he would not cross. There was no price he would not pay. The warehouse district was a graveyard of forgotten industry, a maze of crumbling brick buildings and rusted chain-link fences that rattled in the cold wind. David parked his wife's old minivan a block away and walked the rest, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn jacket. He felt like a ghost himself, invisible and silent as he moved through the shadows. The address led him to a loading bay where a single bulb flickered overhead, casting sickly yellow light on cracked concrete. Vince was waiting for him, leaning against a steel column. He looked older, harder, his face lined with the kind of experience that never comes from a desk job. He was thinner than David remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp and calculating. He was not alone. 2 other men stood in the deeper shadows. One was massive, a wall of muscle with a shaved head. The other was wiry and nervous, constantly shifting his weight. Vince pushed off from the column and walked toward David. "Look at you," Vince said, his voice a low rumble. "Accountant of the year. Heard you got a problem." David did not return the smile. "I don't want to be here, Vince." Vince shrugged. "Nobody ever does. But here you are. Desperation is the most honest thing in the world." He gestured for David to follow him inside. The space was vast and empty, their footsteps echoing. A single folding table sat in the center, lit by a camping lantern. On it was a blueprint, a detailed map of the downtown area. Vince placed a finger on a specific building. First Mercantile Bank. North Branch. Small, local, no heavy security. They move a lot of cash on Fridays. David stared at the map. His heart pounded, primal fear clawing at his throat. "I'm not a thief. I don't know how to do this." Vince's smile widened. "You're not stealing. You're driving. That's all. You know this city better than anyone. You drove a cab during college. You're not a thief." You're our transportation coordinator." For the next 3 days, David's life became a careful performance. He went to work, he crunched numbers, he nodded along to his boss's jokes. He visited Lily in the hospital, reading her stories and holding her hand until she fell asleep. And every night, he drove to the warehouse to learn the plan. Vince was meticulous, a perfectionist who left nothing to chance. The nervous man was named Leo, and he was the tech expert, a former electronics store manager who had lost everything to gambling. The massive man was called Krill, an enforcer for a long-defunct loan shark. Krill barely spoke, but when he did, it was in a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the chest. The plan was simple in concept but required perfect execution. At exactly 2:55 p.m. on Friday, a security guard would open the rear door of the bank to take a smoke break. Leo had been monitoring the bank for a week and knew the guard's routine down to the second. Krill would neutralize the guard without causing permanent injury. They would then enter through the rear, moving to the vault area where the branch manager would be preparing the cash for the weekend. Leo would handle the electronic locks. The entire operation inside was timed for 3 minutes. David's role was the most critical. He would be waiting in a stolen sedan parked on a side street 1 block away. The moment he heard a specific code word from Vince, he would pull up to the rear alley. The timing had to be perfect. Vince had mapped out 3 separate escape routes, each a labyrinth of backstreets designed to avoid main thoroughfares where police would set up roadblocks. David studied them obsessively, memorizing every turn. On the 3rd night, Vince handed him a duffel bag. Inside was a cheap suit jacket, gloves, and a baseball cap. "Your uniform," Vince said. "You're just another guy picking up his boss from the airport." Friday arrived with a gray, overcast sky that pressed down on the city like a lid. David woke before the alarm, his body humming with a strange, detached energy. He went through the motions of his morning routine, kissing Claire goodbye and promising to visit Lily after work. He drove to his office, sat at his desk, and stared at a spreadsheet without seeing any of the numbers. At noon, he told his boss he wasn't feeling well and left early. He drove home, changed into the cheap jacket and cap, and then took a series of buses to the warehouse district. The sedan was waiting, parked in the shadows of the loading bay. It was a nondescript gray 4-door, the kind of car that blended into any city street. Krill was already there, sitting in the back seat, silent and massive. Leo was in the passenger seat, fiddling with a small laptop and earpieces. Vince stood by the driver's door, his face impassive. He handed David a burner phone and a single earpiece. "Put it in. Don't speak unless spoken to. Just listen and drive." David got behind the wheel. The engine started with a quiet hum. At 2:30 p.m., Vince gave the order. "Let's move." David pulled out and into traffic. He drove calmly, precisely, obeying every traffic law. He was a ghost, invisible. He drove the route he had memorized, the streets passing in a blur. He saw the hospital as he passed a block away, the building where his daughter lay waiting. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. At 2:50 p.m., he turned onto the side street next to the bank. He could see the rear of the building, the alley where the security guard would appear. He parked and killed the engine. The silence was deafening. Through the earpiece, he could hear Leo counting down. 60 seconds to guard. David's palms sweated on the wheel. He thought about Claire, about Lily. He reached for the ignition, ready to drive away. But before his fingers touched the key, Leo's voice crackled. "Guard is down. Krill is in." Go time in 90 seconds. It was too late. He was committed. The next minutes stretched into an eternity, each second an agonizing unit of time. David's hands remained locked on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He could hear chaos through the earpiece, a jumbled symphony of heavy breathing, quick footsteps, and Leo's calm voice guiding them. Vince, the manager, is cooperating. Vault is open. A thud, a muffled curse from Krill. Then Vince's voice, sharp and clear. We're loading. 40 seconds. David's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, then to the alley, then back to the mirror. A woman walked a dog at the end of the street. A delivery truck rumbled past. The world was going on normally, unaware of the earthquake happening feet away. 30 seconds, Leo counted. We have 2 marked units responding to a silent alarm. They are 3 minutes out. A silent alarm. David's blood ran cold. Vince hadn't mentioned that. We knew about it, Vince snapped. We have a window. Stay on target. David's mind raced. 3 minutes. The escape route was designed to take them out in under 2. They could make it. 10 seconds. David put the car in gear. Now. Go. Go. Vince's voice exploded. David floored the accelerator. The sedan lurched forward, tires squealing as he tore down the side street and screeched into the alley. The rear door burst open. Krill emerged first, carrying 2 heavy duffel bags. Leo was right behind him. Vince came last, shoving the disheveled bank manager back inside before sprinting for the car. The rear doors flew open, Krill and Leo dove in, Vince slid into the passenger seat. Drive! David didn't need to be told. He accelerated down the alley, buildings blurring past. He took the first turn onto a narrow one-way street, ignoring honking horns. He was in the zone now, the memorized routes playing out in his mind. He took a hard right, then a left, weaving through the city's underbelly. We have units converging on the primary route, Leo announced, eyes glued to his laptop. They're setting up a perimeter. They're anticipating the highway. David made a split-second decision. He ignored the plan's second route and took a sharp turn into an underground parking garage. The tires screamed on concrete. He sped down the ramp, past rows of parked cars, and emerged from a different exit on the other side of the block. He had just bypassed the entire police perimeter. Vince looked at him, genuine respect flickering in his eyes. Not bad, accountant. But David didn't feel relief. He felt cold dread. The escape had been too clean. The police had been too slow, too predictable. It felt staged. The feeling grew with every mile. They were on the tertiary route now, back roads leading to the industrial zone. Leo continued monitoring the scanner. They're pulling units back from the perimeter, Leo said, frowning. They're concentrating on the highway and bridges. It's like they know we're not there, but they're not sure where we are. David glanced at Vince. That doesn't make sense. They should be flooding the area. Vince was quiet, his jaw tight. He didn't like it either. The police response felt wrong. It was as if they had expected the robbery, but not the escape route. They drove for another 10 minutes, tension thick in the car. Finally, the industrial zone came into view, a wasteland of scrapyards and shuttered factories. The chop shop was a corrugated metal building behind a high fence topped with razor wire. Leo punched a code into a keypad at the gate, and it swung open. David drove inside. The building was cavernous, filled with the skeletal remains of stripped cars. A man in greasy coveralls waved them toward a bay. David killed the engine. The silence was sudden and profound. Vince turned to him. "Stay here." He, Krill, and Leo got out, leaving David alone. He watched them through the rearview mirror, walking toward a small office in the corner. Krill carried the two heavy duffel bags. David's bag, his $40,000, was supposed to be in the trunk. He hadn't seen it loaded. Anxiety washed over him. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He saw movement in the office window. Vince was arguing with the chop shop owner. Krill stood behind them, a statue. Leo was on his phone, his face pale. Then, everything happened at once. The distant wail of sirens pierced the air, growing louder with terrifying speed. The chop shop owner shouted and ran. Krill dropped the duffel bags and drew a gun. Vince burst out of the office, his face a mask of fury, screaming something. Leo was frozen. David's instincts took over. He turned the key, the engine roared to life, and he slammed the car into reverse just as the first police cruiser smashed through the front gate. Tires screeched, men shouted, the air filled with deafening chaos. David reversed blindly, crashing into scrap metal, then threw the car into drive and headed for a side exit, a narrow gap between shipping containers. He burst through a flimsy wooden barrier and onto a service road, the sirens fading behind him. He was out. He was alone. And he had no money. David drove for 20 minutes on autopilot, his mind a blank scream of terror. He found himself on a deserted stretch of road near the river, pulling the car behind an abandoned warehouse. He killed the engine and sat there, shaking uncontrollably. The police had known. They had been waiting. It was a setup. But who? He thought about Vince's face in that final moment. Vince hadn't known either. Someone had betrayed them all. He got out, legs unsteady, and walked to the trunk. He popped it open, not expecting to find anything. But there, in the corner, was a small nylon backpack he had never seen. He grabbed it and got back in the car. Hands trembling, he unzipped it. It was full of cash. Neat stacks of $100 bills. Maybe 20,000. It wasn't the 40 he was promised. But it was something. He sat for a long time, the weight of the backpack on the passenger seat. Vince and the others were either dead or in custody. He was the only one who had gotten away. He was a fugitive. He had a bag of stolen money. And his daughter was waiting for treatment he could now partially afford. But how could he use it? It was hot. Every serial number was surely recorded. He couldn't just walk into the hospital and pay with stacks of hundreds. He needed to think. He started the car and drove, staying off main roads, heading away from the city. He drove for an hour until he reached a cheap motel on the outskirts of a small town. He paid cash for a room, using a fake name. The room was small and musty. He locked the door, drew the curtains, and emptied the backpack onto the bed. $20,000. Enough for the first round of treatment. But as he stared at the money, he knew he couldn't use it. Not yet. Not until he understood what had happened. David spent a sleepless night in the motel room, jumping at every sound, the TV muted on a news channel. He watched local news at 11, then midnight. Nothing about the bank robbery. By 6 a.m., he watched the early broadcast. Still nothing. It was as if it had never happened. This was wrong. A bank robbery in a major city was news. The silence meant the police were keeping it quiet. They were playing a deeper game. He had to find out what happened to Vince. Vince was his only link to the truth. But he couldn't go back to the city. He couldn't use his phone. He was completely cut off. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Then he remembered Leo. Leo was the tech guy, the nervous gambler. If anyone would crack under pressure, it was Leo. David needed information. He waited until dark, then drove back toward the city on back roads. He parked the stolen sedan in a long-term lot at the airport, blending it in. He took a shuttle to the terminal, then a taxi to a library. He used a public computer to search for news. Nothing. He searched for Vince's name. An old arrest record from 10 years ago, nothing recent. He searched for Leo's name and found a hit. A small article from 2 years ago about a gambling debt lawsuit. It listed Leo's last known address. An apartment in a rundown part of the city. David memorized it and left. He took a bus, then walked, keeping his head down. The address led to a crumbling brick building. He watched the entrance from across the street. He saw drug deals, arguments, people coming and going. Then he saw someone else. A man in a cheap suit, sitting in an unmarked car at the end of the block. Surveillance. They were watching Leo's place. David turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. He was completely alone. He found a different motel, this one so anonymous it didn't even have a name on the sign. He paid for a week in advance with cash, using another fake name. He spent the next 2 days in suspended animation, watching the news obsessively, venturing out only for food and to use public computers at different libraries. On the third day, he found it. A small blurb in an online crime blog mentioned a major arrest related to a financial institution investigation but gave no names. It said the FBI was involved. The FBI. This was bigger than local police. David felt the walls closing in. He thought about Lily. He hadn't called Claire. He hadn't dared. Any call could be traced. She must be frantic. He had to do something. He bought a prepaid burner phone from a gas station and walked to a phone booth miles from his motel. He dialed the hospital and asked for Lily's room. Claire answered on the second ring. Her voice was raw, exhausted. Hello? David's throat closed up. He couldn't speak. Hello? Claire said again, hope creeping in. David? Is that you? He heard commotion in the background, a nurse's voice, then Claire speaking to someone. Then a new voice came on the line, calm and professional. Mr. Marsh? This is Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to talk. David's blood turned to ice. He slammed the phone down. They had tapped Lily's phone line. They knew. He stumbled away from the phone booth, barely able to walk. He found a dark alley and leaned against a wall, fighting the urge to vomit. He was trapped. As he turned to leave, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking his path. It was Leo. David froze. Leo, the nervous gambler, standing in a dark alley, very much alive. Leo looked worse than before. His clothes were dirty, his eyes wild with fear, a fresh cut on his cheek. He held up his hands. "Don't run. Please. I need your help." David's instinct was to flee. "You're supposed to be in jail." Leo shook his head, glancing toward the street. "I got out. When the cops hit the chop shop, I ran. Krill started shooting, Vince was screaming. I hid in a drainage ditch for hours." He took a step closer. David backed away. "How did you find me?" Leo pointed at the phone booth. "I've been watching the hospital. I knew you'd call. I'd been waiting for days." David stared at him, suspicion washing over him. "You set us up. You're the rat." Leo's eyes widened. "No. I'm as screwed as you are. They took everything." David didn't believe him. "Then why did the police know exactly where we were going?" Leo swallowed hard. "It wasn't me. It was Vince." David blinked. "What?" Leo leaned against the wall, exhausted. "Vince has been working with someone. A fixer. A guy who sets up jobs and takes a cut. I didn't know until the end. Vince was arguing with someone on his phone. He said, 'You said the perimeter would be clear.' Then the sirens started." David's mind raced. Vince had been betrayed by his own partner. "Who is the fixer?" Leo shook his head. "I don't know his real name. Vince called him the Suit. He planned everything. He knew the guard's schedule, the silent alarm. Everything." David stared at Leo. "And now?" Leo looked at him with desperate hope. "Now, the Suit has the money. The real money. Those duffel bags Krill was carrying? Full of cut paper. Decoy bags. The Suit switched them. Vince didn't even know." David thought about the backpack in his motel room. 20,000. A small fraction. The Suit had played them all. Vince was likely dead or in custody. Only David remained unknown. "Why come to me?" he asked. Leo met his gaze. "Because you got away. You're the only one. And I know where the Suit is." Leo explained. After escaping, he had watched Vince's associates and spotted a black SUV near the bank before the robbery and near the chop shop after. He traced the license plate through a hacker contact. The SUV was registered to a shell corporation linked to a man named Harrison Cole, a financial consultant with a clean record. Harrison Cole was the Suit. David listened, his mind working. A name, a location. A thread he could pull. Why not go to the police? Leo laughed bitterly. And say I was part of a bank robbery? I'd go to jail. But you're clean. No record. You have a daughter. You have a reason to fight. He looked at David intently. You can get to him. Find the money. And when you do, I want my share. Just enough to disappear. David didn't trust him, but he needed the information. Leo gave him the address of Cole's office in the financial district. Then he added, one more thing. The FBI agent at the hospital? Miller? I saw him at the chop shop. He was there, directing the raid. David's blood ran cold. An FBI agent at the chop shop. The suit wasn't just a fixer. He had a partner in the FBI. The next evening, David stood across from the Gleaming Tower in the financial district. He wore a cheap thrift store suit and carried an abandoned briefcase. He looked like a junior accountant, invisible. He waited until he saw a light click on in Harrison Cole's office on the 15th floor. At 8:45 p.m., he took the elevator up. The hallway was quiet. He opened the door without knocking. Harrison Cole looked up from his desk, surprise flickering in his eyes before being replaced by a practiced smile. "Can I help you?" David closed the door. "You're the suit." Cole's smile faded. He studied David. "The accountant. Vince mentioned you. He said you were a wild card." David leaned forward. "Where's the money?" Cole leaned back. "The decoy bags were seized. The real money is in offshore accounts." "You're too late." David felt rage but kept it in check. "You had a partner. Agent Miller. He tipped you off." Cole's eyes widened. He reached for a desk drawer. David was faster. He grabbed a heavy glass paperweight and slammed it down on Cole's hand. Cole screamed. David opened the drawer. Inside was a gun. He picked it up. His hand was steady. He had never held a gun before, but he felt only cold determination. "Call your partner. Tell him to come here alone." Cole made the call. Miller arrived 20 minutes later, his confidence evaporating when he saw David holding the gun. David made them sit on the floor while he used Cole's computer. He was an accountant. He knew how to follow money. Cole, terrified, gave up passwords. David found the offshore accounts. He transferred exactly $40,000 into a new account. Then he called a tip line for police corruption, gave them Cole's name, Miller's name, and the address. He left them bound with phone cords. He walked to the hospital. Lily was awake, her eyes tired but bright. "Daddy." David sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. The next day, he paid for the treatment. A week later, Lily improved. The news was full of the scandal, a financial consultant and an FBI agent arrested. The driver was never found. David went back to work. He crunched numbers, went home to his wife and daughter. He never spoke of what happened. But sometimes, late at night, he remembered. He had crossed a line. But he had saved his daughter. And for the first time in months, his life finally added up.